Oxford University Press, namely Where the Rivers Meet in 2020, The Magical Woods in 2014, and The Adventures of Slothful Slough in 2010. Where the Rivers Meet won the 10th UBL Literary Awards in the English Children's Literature category in 2022. Her story, The Heartbeat Tree, appeared in Magic Stories for 8-year-olds, published by Puffin India in 2011. In 2016, the Preston Road Community Library campaign named her as their Children's Laureate and held a Saman Shamsi Young Writers Challenge for children. She also took part in the Alchemy Festival of Art and Culture from South Asia and the United Kingdom, held at the South Bank in 2016. Saman now works as the primary section at the Karachi Grammar School, but she also taught O-level physics at their college section. Seated next to Ms. Saman Shamsi is Dr. Nadia Chishti Mujahid. She is an assistant professor at the Department of Social Sciences and Liberal Arts, School of Economics and Social Sciences, Institute of Business Administration, Karachi. She is the author of a monograph titled Fraternal Main Twinship in History, Society, Fiction, and Entertainment. Previously, she wrote a book titled A Political Chess King, which ranked 87th on Edwin Mellon Top 100 prize-winning book list. In addition, she has authored 8 other books, several articles, and over 150 book reviews. Seated next to her is Zarmeena Raza. Zarmeena Raza is the co-founder of the truth-telling platform, The Crows Karachi, as well as the podcast, A Cup of Possibility. She's also an educator who currently teaches literature at Cedar, Eden, KGS, and Links, and is on the IKU IED blog editorial board. In 2020, she started 2 reading and writing meetups called Poetry in the Park, an on-site young adults group, and Inked Conversations, an online one for adults. Last year, she co-edited and contributed to Ink Conversations, an anthology about COVID experiences. She has also read her poems at the 13th and 14th Karachi Literature Festivals, and she also writes creative nonfiction and likes to paint abstracts with acrylic and ink. And my final guest on this panel has traveled all the way from England to join us at this conference. Please welcome Ms. Shahza Fatma, who is a writer of 2 novels, How It Happened, published by Penguin India, and A Firefly in the Dark by Speaking Tiger Books. She currently lives in St. Albans and is editing her 3rd book about marriage and divorce. So, ladies, moving on to a writer's dilemma. The great astrophysicist Carl Sagan said, "Writing is perhaps the greatest of human inventions, binding together people, citizens of different and distinct epochs, who never know one another. Books break the shackles of time, proof that humans can work magic." The term magic. But before magic happens, what happens before that? Let's talk about a motivation, ideas, inspiration, and the dreaded writer's block. Ladies. So yesterday, we were actually talking about running up to the event today, and of course, WhatsApp groups are wonderful about that. And someone pointed out that currently she has a blog, and then Nadia said, is it like ice? And it is like that. Your mind just becomes numb, and you really can't think what is the next word you want to put. So if I could ask you to refer to one of your pieces of writing and how you felt during that writer's block, and how did you overcome that?
Me?
Yes.
Okay, so right now I am in a block because I've written 6 pages in November and I haven't got further than that. So that block I haven't gotten over yet. In the past, I think the last book I wrote, Where the Rivers Meet, was, there was actually a competition that I had sort of as a deadline. And I thought if I make this deadline, I can, send this book off. And that actually helped me not get a writer's block because I was writing every day. And I think what's happened this time is I wrote a few pages and then I put it away because it was a very busy time of the term. I should have started a little later or something. And going back now, I've lost that, what was I thinking, where is it going? But I think the main thing was to write. If you're writing every day, you just force yourself to just sit down as an exercise that I have to write. Previously, in the the magical words, we used to have a writers group. It's Zarmeena, me. I think Shazaf, were you part of that ever? No, but
I know everything that's happening in Zarmeena's life.
yes, but it was around the time when I think you might have been, maybe you had left. But Zarmeena, me, and a couple of others, we used to meet weekly or monthly to write. And because we had to write and read out to each other, that kept the pen flowing in a way. So I think it's about discipline rather than anything else.
Can I add to that, Saman? That's really, absolutely, I think I agree with you. But there are two things I realized at the ripe old age of 40, only two, which is basically that writer's block is caused by your intention. So if you are writing to be read by a large audience, there's nothing like freezing that, right? But if you are irked by a problem and you need to figure it out, then you will never have writer's block, because there is nothing. If you are writing for yourself, and a lot of readers ask me, oh, you know, I'm having writer's block and I don't know what genre my book will be. I said, you're immediately thinking of publication, and there's nothing like that to freeze you. Just write whatever you're conflicted by, and eventually you will find something. So publication and everything to dur ki baat hoti hai na. First you have to write to figure out what you are thinking, right? Yes, you can.
I mean, that may be true, but there's certain ideas that you want to get across, and somehow you know what you want, but sometimes it doesn't come out on the paper, right? So I agree with you, sometimes you have to keep writing and keep twisting maybe the perspective, and I agree, sometimes it's not really about who's going to be reading it, but how does it come out on the paper, and how are you going to deal with that situation. And sometimes you have to keep writing, and I think the toughest is when you have to keep throwing things away because it just does not look good on the paper. It doesn't read well, it doesn't convey what you want, so.
Your turn, Nadia.
Everyone is looking at me. Oh, okay, I better say something. All right, so I'm a professor, okay, and I teach English and speech. And so when I started teaching at the IBA some years ago, my students, the women, young women, are just better at English, okay? They read more, they understand more, etc. They're better at the verbal. The males were very, very difficult to access. They were trying, but they said, well, Miss, ye ghee de Maupassant ka necklace kya hai? Or what on earth are we to do? Some of them who came from out of Karachi, because we have a number of hostelites, would translate the stuff into Urdu, then back to English. It was awful. So I just said, all right, let me get to know some of my male students and what they do in groups or student politics or whatever, internal IBA politics, and then I'll see if I can come up with something to write for them. And then I found that when I would WhatsApp, college-going males do not like to talk very much outside their bro code confines. Ek musibat wo. So what I started doing was, all right, if no one's going to say anything, I'll write what you guys must be thinking. So I would skit on WhatsApp and say, tumne ye kaha hoga aur ye kaha hoga, and so on. And I started getting play material from that. And sometimes they would be daring enough to say, no. You know, you got to put in a couple of foul words there because we swear. And, or no, we wouldn't do it this way or something. But by and large, I was getting pretty authentic. So that's where the political chess king came from. And it was, the girls were very irritated because they said, this play has 15 boys and 1 girl. And I said, a writer is compelled to be authentic. write. And you can't, I mean, I couldn't just make up what college boys are thinking and feeling. I actually had to observe that. And that's where political chess king came from, that it's about a set of political student parties and that the political chess king figure dominates. And in fact, he was horrified when he read it, but he said, yes, this is a pretty accurate portrayal. Anyway, and as for the language, you know, there had to be foul language throughout. And that's where I found Urdu the most useful. Because the play is in English, but if you really want to get to college level student male life, you have to add in an occasional foul word here and there. And that's not the way I am normally, of course, but that's the way the writing is, because the writing has to break certain barriers of, you know, politeness and so on. So there's this episode, and I think I'm just going to say this before I pass the mic on to someone else before all of Nadara's colleagues faint. But in the play, there's a student who's very irritated with this teacher for wanting him to apologize to a senior politico about, well, not having defamed him. I mean, wrongly stating that he had done defamation or something. And so he just snaps when he's told this by his party leader. That's what the teacher does. She goes through the person and then he says, "Wo haramzada apni jagah. Yahan susri uski teacher bhi meri gaand mein ungli kar rahi hai bhejo." So the thing is that comes across as authentic student life, all right? But obviously, it's within the realm of fiction that you can safely do that. Go on to, you know, journalistic territory and you'll suffer. Someone else now, please.
I'm actually, I'm picking up on the buzz going on in the audience because they were expecting that it would all be very literary and lofty. And suddenly Dr. Nadia Chishti Mujahid reminded us that we live in Pakistan and we may have very colorful language in Urdu which can be utilized for the most effective of purposes. And we are talking about language and its effectiveness when it comes to an audience. And well, we initially started with the idea of a writer's block and how do you get over that. And then I have, you know, we shifted to the idea that two of you actually have pointed out that, like Zarmeena, you said that you have to write for yourself. And when Dr. Nadia, you said that you have to be authentic. So are you saying that you have to be authentic to yourself or you're being authentic to the audience? Because my sense is that these are two different things.
It depends on your relationship with your audience. If you are writing for children, right, then you obviously have empathized with their issues at some point. If you are going to write, if you're going to be somebody who reads a lot of nonfiction and want to write a geopolitical thriller, you may not, you know, necessarily be part of a geopolitical narrative. But I think that depends on the connection and relationship between the writer and the audience. I didn't have a problem with the writer's block. I had the reverse, which was after a while the students used to do farmaish. Ab kahani likhe, miss, maine ye kiya hai. Okay. Or sometimes they would be like, okay, we did this, but you're not supposed to write about it, okay? Too many people talk. So, but I think Shazaf, being an experienced novelist, can talk more on what is acceptable when it comes to writing and what gets censored in certain countries and things.
So I wanted to answer your question, which was basically writing for yourself and writing for the audience. So मैंने जब अपनी पहली किताब लिखी थी, and my first novel is How It Happened, and it's a satire on arranged marriages. And it started off in my mind as an article for the Herald or something like that. कि what happens to young girls जब लोग आते हैं and they have to wheel out a rishta trolley and all of that. So I started off and it was very angry, but the article started becoming a novel and the things I wanted to say came out through the voices of my characters. And this is something that I can never forget because it's only happened once. I heard characters talking. And for 5 hours, I was writing in a trance. And then the first 3 chapters of how it happened came out as, they are in the book right now. And that's very interesting because मुझे गुस्सा आया हुआ था. मेरी दोस्त को किसी ने weighing machine पे खड़ा कर दिया था कि I want to weigh you before I can send you the rishta for my child. So I was very angry on her behalf. And I started writing about this, but then everything there, where I was, where I am, what I wanted to write, all of that came in, and I was not aware of it. So I was writing to vent, and that became my writing. And then once I wrote the novel, then I had to think, okay, what am I going to do with this piece of writing? And I kept it in a drawer for 2 years, and then another friend of mine read it and said, this is a novel. And so then I cut and I snipped and I edited, and eventually my agent at that time, Robert Wyatt, he said that this is fantastic and this is what we're going to take it. So I think I think that writer's block only comes when you're trying to think of the end product. Whereas writing a novel is like, for me, it's at least 5 to 7 year process from start to beginning. If you're very lucky, it can be much longer. It has been much longer for me. So I think that's my answer to that question.
Okay, let's take this forward and talk about something which is as banal and mundane for many students, which is about research, editing, and revising your work. And what is your opinion about that? When you're creating what you're doing, for example, Zarmeena, you do write creative nonfiction. So how do you go about the process?
I think, like Shazaf has said, you just write, and then you snip. And I think the editing and the revising process is the hardest. Because, you've written these beautiful lines, at least they seem to you beautiful, and then you have to cut them because they don't belong. And I think that is very hard. I don't know if any of you have felt that way, but I think, again, as everyone is talking about, you have to think about the authenticity of maybe the characters or the writing or the theme, whatever the genre, and according to that, the editing and revising process. But I think there also has to be a time limit. When do you stop? Because, I'll see something, I'm like, oh, this could be better. It's been 5, 6 years, it's been written, it's been sent off, but, it could be better. And I think to draw the line or to figure out, okay, I've sent it out in the world, it's done. So I think it's very difficult, especially because it is like your baby. And you want it to be in the best possible manner, but you want it to be beautiful at times.
The dreaded but, and the struggles with perfectionism, and just feeling like whatever you're producing is just rubbish. It's never going to be accepted. I think that is what everybody who is compelled to put the word on paper or even in your laptop feels that. And even as you said that once you finished, you're never completely sure whether it has taken that shape or form. And in fact, the idea of, where you said that it's like a baby, it's beautifully put in by this author called Diana Anthill, and she said a task that is so dreaded like editing, she said it's like removing layers of crumpled brown paper from an awkwardly shaped parcel and revealing the attractive present which it contained. So I just thought that was such a wonderful way of describing your own work, which you think that is never going to be good enough. And which brings me, actually, I would like you to talk about perfectionism, because you're all writing and you're prolific writers. And just struggling with the idea of perfectionism, because we do live in a society and a time when we are encouraged to be the best. And you have to be at the top, and you have to be wonderful, and you have to be amazing, and you have to have this award and that award. And if you don't achieve any of this, then you're really not worth it. Society gives a message that you just really are not worth it, and that's something that even young writers tend to suffer from. And even people who are not young writers and they still want to take up the pen. They are often given the message, oh, if you are not going to be Ghalib, or, then don't bother. Don't bother, you're not worth it. Or if you're not going to be William Shakespeare, then you're not going to be worth it. So let's talk about the the problems of perfectionism, and if you have suffered from that, because I think everybody does. A writer will always struggle with something like that.
I think professors just live to be scary, okay? So I'm not, but then I think I'm in the minority. And before I address that, I'll, give you a few lines from an anonymous poem, which is very pretty. You may not be an artist with palette or with pen. You may not write a poem to move the hearts of men, but yours is greater service amid earth's care and strife, if you can touch with beauty some dull and cheerless life. Okay, and the thing about that is that everybody's life has a certain level of value and dignity. Now, as far as the perfectionism is concerned, when you are 18 to 22 years old, the last thing in the world you want to do is work towards being perfect, but you'd love to be thought perfect. It's exactly like that line, a classic is a book that everyone wants to say they've read and nobody wants to read. That's what my students sometimes say. Of course, if I can, it was hilarious. I caught one of them having plagiarized, and I said, "You've plagiarized," and he said, "No," and I said, "Yes, because this is my work taken from the library." And for a moment, I was going, "Oh, who is this cool writer?" And then I realized, "Oh God, it's me." But the thing is that if you don't let somebody relax, especially a young person, and write what they want and make a bit of a mess with words and things, it's like children, make a bit of a mess, etc., you're not going to get them to loosen up enough to put what they are feeling or thinking down on paper. The refinement of it can come later. So one should realize it's a process. I mean, everybody says that writing is a process, and they're right. But the point, of course, being that the perfectionism comes with time, and then it changes as you mature. You don't bother. You're not constrained anymore. You can write whatever you want, especially if you've got a big name in writing. Then you can overrule your editor whenever you like, or your agents. But these things go in cycles that way. So, these kids, bichare, if they're terrorized into writing right, they won't write, okay? They'll copy-paste, and then Turnitin will come in, and then there'll be committees, and then it'll be like, "Please save us, Miss Nadra, please."
Tough one, save us, Miss Nadra. So when you're talking about showing kindness to people when they are doing something creative, I think it's a reminder that we need to bring that in. We've forgotten how it is like to be kind and how it is like to give people space when they are being creative. It's never going to be, as you said, rightly said, it's never going to be, you don't produce something that you're comfortable with or happy with on the go. It takes its time. It's a developing process, as you pointed out. But I think for teachers, because interestingly, all of them are a part of education, they are teachers, or, Shazaf is currently not, but she has taught. And I think from that perspective also, there is a problem with the writing process, and I don't know if you're also struggling with that with your students. And I have students here in the audience of varying age groups. The concept of how you deal with extrinsic motivation and intrinsic. Because if everything is marks oriented, and now we have artificial intelligence, everybody's like, Chat GPT is my best friend. So if you have that now, how do we bring in that passion for writing? I think that is something I'm struggling with, to be honest, and truthful, because that's being authentic. How do you bring that passion in? How do you bring that passion in your student where they want to pick up the pen and say, yes, I'm going to write about this?
So a friend of mine did introduce me to ChatGPT just yesterday. And I was saying that this writers, I was going to be on this panel. And they said, well, what is your book about? And they started putting stuff in. And I thought it was just fascinating. And I thought this is interesting because it can give you an idea which you can go with. But it also, it does open up that question about where will the creative process be in a few years' time? That if you can just put in an idea and, this thing just writes 3 paragraphs in the style of, say, Michael Mopogo, and, you've put in your sort of, and then you can change them, okay, the second paragraph, let's change it. And it's just actually, I do wonder how far it'll go, what it'll do to the creative process. But I just thought it was just as a lark. It was just interesting to see that, oh, okay, so, I have a mist over here, and this one has said, oh, the mist was created by, it could be created by this in my story also, So how you use it, how people will use it, it's too soon to tell. But just because you mentioned it, I thought that this is what I was introduced to, and I was amazed at, we started just putting in, writing rap songs and putting, just putting in the parameters and getting all kinds of stuff out of it. So let's see where this goes and how it can be used, but I think it'll be a dilemma for teachers of creative writing, and how do you spot it? Though I think you can spot it, they are finding loopholes and ways to spot it also. But this is something that we have to look for in the future.
So when I was teaching creative writing, I'm so sorry, I'm jet lagged, so I keep losing the thread of what I was saying. So I had a whole really great point in my head, and now I've forgotten about it. But when I was teaching creative writing, yes, when you say students of 18 to 22, most of us have not really lived much of a life, I feel, at that time. Some of us have, and then those actually are the writers who come, and they have something to write about. But otherwise, a lot of people want to write, but they don't read enough. The last 5 years of my life, I've basically bringing up children. I have twins and a 6-year-old and a 16-year-old stepson, so I don't have the time to read or write. And I had the worst writer's block because I felt, what am I going to... I couldn't string a sentence together. I was one of those mothers, wo kya kehte hain, wahan se wo le aao. The words were escaping me. And then all I did was I started reading again. I got a Kindle, and usually when you're putting children to sleep at night, you read on a Kindle, because I could only read in the dark. And the words started coming slowly. And the other thing is that we think that there are only certain big themes that we need to read about and think and write about. And this is my biggest beef with Pakistani audiences. I remember a writer, Sabine Javeri, she was asked this question, you're not equipped to write politics. When I wrote about marriage, they said, hum log, Khawateen Digest likha hai aapne about marriage, sort of thing. Or if you think about, we're not coming up with enough writers to write books. When I was teaching creative writing, and there was an essay, create a mood of horror. Witches or bats or usper chale gaye. Nobody talked about the ulti paun chudel, the sheesh nagan, the jinn, our own mythology. It was seen as, but that's not important. So these are the 3, I think, blocks. First of all, you don't read enough. And that is the only fault of the students. Okay? You have to read a lot more. The second thing is, anything you write about is important. It depends on why is it important to you. If it is important to you, that energy will convey itself to the reader. Okay? And that's perhaps your challenge. Okay? What about whatever? The third thing I want to write about right now is, so when I was getting married, I wrote about the process of getting married. When I got divorced, I wrote about black magic and jinn. Now that I've processed my divorce, and so now I'm writing about divorce, and now I've had so many children with my husband, I'm going to write about motherhood. And all of these things are perfectly correct to write about. I don't need permission to write about them. I don't need the permission of an imaginary agent or an imaginary editor or a publisher in my head. Because if I have written something, I'll tell you what helps though. Even if something I write now never gets published again, my children have something that this is who their mother was and this is what she wrote. And that is as valuable to me as a prize. It would be nice to win a prize. But if I don't, then it's enough for me to get children, to read it. So I suppose I think as a teacher, you have to say everything goes. You can write about everything. but you have to live a little and you have to read a little. And it will come if you want a story to come.
I think I like that. If you want the story to come, live a little, and, you know, the idea that let your wings fly, basically. One of the other struggles, and I'm now taking this in a different direction, that I think writers tend to face is the idea of isolation, because we are compelled to be in a society where we have to be connected all the time, whether it's through the social media or through any other way. And I do wonder, when it comes to writers, do you need to have some sense of isolation in your life in order to write? In this over-connected world that we're in? Do you feel that you require that? If anybody would like to attempt answering that.
I mean, I would love a babysitter, so I could write. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, you can't write with 50 distractions taking place around you, right? But that goes for anything creative. If you paint, you know, you have to focus on the canvas and what's going on in your head. If it's music, you also have to do that somewhat in isolation, unless it's a collaborative effort. Most people don't collaborate when it comes to writing fiction, although there are short story anthologies, but those are edited by somebody overarching. With writing, yes, you need periods of isolation. What I do is, because I don't have time, I'm not a novelist. I'm writing for my students and then getting them to study that as a piece of English, and then they can relate to it, enjoy it, it's all about them anyway, and then they can go ahead and write on it. So what I do is I write short stories, and those I can do in one sitting. So that's probably why I can avoid the writer's block, because then I'll just sit there, visualize the story in my head and put it down on paper, and normally I get that done in about 5 or 6 hours. I just write it straight. And then I go back and I edit it, obviously, because I'm an English teacher, so I better be fair and edit myself too. But I can see why a novelist like Shazwaf has a much more challenging task, because you are inspired and then you write something, and then and then you later have to go back and go, okay, now what do I do after this? Like, this is brilliant. It's like Coleridge. He took opium, wrote 2 great stanzas of Kubla Khan, and then was called away on an errand and forgot his whole vision. So Kubla Khan's pretty short. It's amazing, but it's short. Yeah. But and he got a writer's block after it. So, yeah, that's the way it was. Anyway.
But that's because Wordsworth dominated him.
Yeah.
He told him, okay, your poems are not right.
Mm-hmm.
He crushed his original with it. Sorry, my literature thesis was on this.
Okay, wow. Would you like to comment on that?
Because
I feel, you know, that you're in that unique position where you're actually a novelist. You're not just somebody writing short stories, although I will publish some of mine too. But I'm primarily an academic and a critic. As well as a professor. But I want you to comment on your literature thesis and what she was talking about in terms of editing it and perfectionism, and then how you view it now that you have made your name as a novelist. So.
I don't know if I have made a name, but what I feel is that with Coleridge and Wordsworth, I felt that Coleridge had a very feminine imagination. If you look at his poems, and the ones that I studied, they are extremely powerful, and they have female energies, feminine energies that I go at length to describe. And Wordsworth was very much the man who edited. He was the editor. He over-edited his own poems, you see. And I feel like there was the spontaneous flow that Coleridge had, and there was Wordsworth cutting and snipping it, and I felt that was very similar to how a woman is, and how she is constantly constrained by patriarchy. And that was what my comment is. About as a novelist, I just feel, and you know this whole thing about Kubla Khan, Sylvia Plath says that, you know, how lucky the novelists have. They have endless time, whereas we poets only have a moment. And she's basically dissing novelists. She's like, "Tumhare paas to itna time hai, so you better do it well." But we poets just have a vision, and then we need to execute it at that time, because once the inspiration is lost, it's lost. So I do think it's a completely different process. I cannot do poetry. I do not write poetry. But it is a different power. And the novelist Jeet Thayil once told me that, you know, novelists can be dancing on tables at night and drinking and having a great time because they've written that poem that day, whereas a novelist they have their time. You know, going from if they were writing at night, or if they write at a particular point of a day, if they give themselves 4 hours, the discipline is there.
There's no escaping discipline for anything that's creative, even if you're a dancer, and you have to work with that.
So isolationism, you were saying, I think you need to find some kind of balance, because before I was an artist before I was a writer or a teacher, I used to be an artist and I used to work on my own. And I actually found it very isolating just working in a studio alone. And even though I had a couple of friends who I then joined up with, I think you need to find some kind of balance. Now it's gone the opposite extreme. I'm a teacher, which is just all-consuming also. But we get summer holidays, we get breaks, and you need to be able to find that space where you can write. When I wrote Magical Woods, I wrote most of it over the summer holiday. I used to go to the British Library because I was in London visiting my sister. I used to go with her, find 2 hours in the morning, write every day. When, like I said, the other book, Where the Rivers Meet, I did it during a term because I had this deadline, this competition in mind. And because I had to write every day, I just found an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour, where I would just say, okay, now I'm just going to lock myself away. I have to write to get, you know, so many pages a day. But you have to find that quiet space, I feel. But if you get too much, I found that if I got too locked into that quiet space before, I can no longer go back to being like not working.
The muse escapes you.
Yes.
Okay, which brings me to the final question before we open it up to everybody for their questions, the audience. You know, your book is ready, it's done and dusted, and now you're saying, okay, I have to definitely send it off. So let's talk a little bit about finding a publisher, the process of that. And then once you found that, how do you maintain the traction? And linked to that, is there some sort of financial stability or not? So 3 key areas. The first one was the torture of writing that book, the pains of it, of producing, you know, that baby. But now the baby's out and now you have to make the baby grow. So what do you do about that? You know, most writers think, even if you're a poet and everything, everybody says the same thing, that it's a very debilitating process. It's a very dehumanizing process because you're again reduced to nothing. I've heard that so many times, and I'm wondering what would be your personal take on that?
So I am getting to the process where by July I will submit the manuscript for my 3rd novel to my agent. And I can say that you feel like a fraud every time you're writing, right? And every time you feel like you're back on square one. But the 3rd time, I'm just aware that this feeling of being an imposter, I am aware that it's going to come, so I'm ready for it, whereas I was crippled by it the first time. So that's the only, and it's like having children. The first time you feel like, will I ever sleep again? The next time you say, okay, I will sleep again, but I won't sleep for 6 months, so I can handle this. It's the same thing. And I personally cannot make a living, but I know that I know that if you have uninterrupted time, and if you start early enough and you are from a family that is reading and writing, you can make a living out of your writing. And I'm thinking of Niranjana Roy, because she writes for the Friday Times. She reviews books. She's been reviewing books since she was 13. She's written 3 wonderful novels. This writer, she's one of my favorite writers, and she's based in India, and her 3rd book is coming out called Black River, which I would highly recommend that all of you buy. But if you are a writer, very controversial now, in Pakistan, I have made no money out of books because I have signed many pirated editions of my own book. So I'm not getting any royalties out of the sale of those books. And these are problems. And secondly, you know, books are expensive. They're as expensive as a cup of coffee, but a cup of coffee is more satisfying, I would imagine. So it's also the priorities. So I don't know. I personally don't feel. So when I was writing, I was teaching full time because that was my salary and that was my earning, and my writing was my passion. And I will say, I've talked to so many writers, and they say, don't quit your day job just yet until you have enough success where you know that you have a 5-book deal or a 3-book deal and you can see this going somewhere. And if your publisher and your agent are lucky to have a conversation with you, or you're lucky enough to have a conversation with them saying, yes, there seems to be some longevity. Otherwise, you need to hedge your bets and keep a day job.
Keep the day job.
Yes.
Okay, would anyone else do all of you agree with the idea that?
Yes, I definitely am relying on my teaching. I think my books don't have that sort of a wide audience. And they're not available outside Pakistan also, so it's a very limited audience. So it's tough, yeah. It's more
tough,
that
but satisfying.
it is satisfying. It's sort of, for me, it's not my primary reason sort of for being in a way. When I was an artist, it was very much something that drove me. Teaching drives me. For me, writing is much more of a hobby, so it's okay for me being a side thing. But if it was a full-time thing, then I think you have an agent. That helps a lot. Like I went to a workshop to, about how could you get your books published abroad. The first thing was get an agent. And I think from sitting over here, it's difficult to get an agent sitting in another country. So for me, it's very limited. When I wrote my first book, I wrote it in 2002. I didn't publish it till 2010 because I wasn't ready to give it to the outside world. And all of my books I wrote, it takes 4 or 5 years sometimes before I even give it out to the outside world. I do write primarily because I feel like, okay, it's going somewhere, but then I feel like there's a part of me in that book that I don't want to expose to the world. And then 3 years later, I'm like, I can't remember what I was thinking at the time and what am I hiding, So it's fine, I just put it out there. So it's different for me, I think.
If you're an academic, you don't have a choice. It's publish or perish. Okay? अब ये और बात है कि यहाँ लोग बैठे रहते हैं, कुछ करते नहीं, come in, do a few lectures, say I'm a professor, and they'll never publish anything. I'm horrified when I look around because I write a monograph every year, and you could tell that I've done tons of book reviews, and I actually read the book too. In fact, a couple of times.
Wikipedia for you?
Yeah, a couple of times Dawn said, well, maybe we'll send your book here. And the guy went, nahi, wo to puri padti hai, bhai. We can't have her review it. But I got a compliment, and because I'm at SZABIST, I'll comment on this. There's a book called The Fragrance of Tears about Benazir, written by her friend Victoria Schofield. And Schofield was a speaker at the KLF a couple of years ago. And I sent her a book review I'd written in South Asia magazine. And even she, although she complimented me when she saw me at the conference, she said, "You really read it?" I said, "Of course, I have to." Because unless, first of all, that's my job, it's ethical. And second, unless you read the whole thing, you're not going to do justice to either the book or the author. So there's a lot of effort that goes into that, but academic publishing and so on is not commercial. So we don't make our living from that. We make our living from teaching at SZABIST or teaching at IBA or whatever, and so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you so much. We now open, we give the opportunity to the audience to ask any questions, and I'm going to hand over the mic. Please remember that you are supposed to frame a question and not pass a comment. So yes, and it should just be a question, and keep it brief. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Munawar Hamid Mangalwala, and my question is to, I'm from Keech University. My question is to Dr. Nadia Chishti. You are basically heading you are in the social sciences department of IBA, right? When we talk about social sciences, it means we are talking about philosophy, psychology, sociology. And at the time of the admission, generally, the concept of EQ is not conducted, is not tested, or is not being asked to the students, but they focus on IQ. Then at the end of the day, when the students, they come out after getting their graduation, they do not prove themselves a good leader either at home or in the country. What is the solution in your mind? Thank you very much.
Emotional quotient versus intelligence quotient, I think that's what you asked. I am not sure, I would find it very embarrassing if IBA in 65 years has produced no good leaders. If I affirm that, I'll get sacked. Okay, so I think, sir, that what you're saying is, you're testing to see whether the child is smart enough to do maths and English and so on and so forth. And then what do you teach them in terms of the EQ, in that how do you make them mature and become better thinkers and individuals and so on and so forth? One hopes that pedagogically their professors are responsible enough to do that. She's very good, I know that, Nadra here. In terms of the care that she puts into her students, etc. I do it with more detachment, but as I said, through the stories. I mean, I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't cared for the students. And those are very emotional sometimes. And then fiction is very good in that you can write from behind a veil, without offending anyone. So I think that whether you turn out a good leader or not, you can only do so much. And then after a certain point, that person will utilize whatever they learned at their educational institution. And if they don't, and they end up terrible, you'll have to wonder where you might have gone wrong. But it may not have something to do with the institute. It just might be the person. Well, we've turned out a lot of leaders globally and certainly nationally. President Mamnoon Hussain was from IBA. Asad Umar, the minister, was from IBA. And then we've had a lot of people who are good leaders leading IBA who have come out of other institutions. So, no, I think there's plenty of hope for the country. And I suppose the same goes for SZABIST.
Would anyone else like to ask a question?
May I? Assalamu alaikum. My name is Syed Kaisar Hussain. I am an assistant professor in the languages program here at SZABIST. My question is from Ms. Shazaf, if I may. You very rightly pointed out the fear of being, not going to the point, because people, they distribute copies, the illegal copies of your work, and they come in the market in the printed forms. But having this fear in your mind, do you think it is going to reduce the number of intelligent works in in different disciplines and in different domains? On the contrary, we have a very huge market of e-books, and you cannot download them, you have to buy them. And there is another concept going on, which is go green, means less print and more smart and more soft copy. So don't you think you can also switch towards that? And because we need to value writers and intellectual people coming with intellectual thoughts, so this fear should not stop the intellectual input in the society when we have an alternative for that?
Thank you. So I've been approached by a lot of readers who, say, Miss, can you please give me the free PDF copy of your book? So there's a way around that as well. So if people don't want to pay, they don't want to pay. I actually was pretty thrilled because I was told that How It Happened was a bestseller of the pirated market. So at least I was being read, even if I did. So this is why I say that one has to have a day job. But the second point that you say, we need to value the people who create. okay? Because I think science, maths, etc., they help us to live, you know? But poetry gives us something to live for. Art gives us something to live for. आप लोग जी किस लिए रहे हैं? And if you don't pay attention, if you don't even give, you know, the poor dying artist is a trope, but you know, someone was asking me, we recently were in Rome, and someone said that, you know, why don't we produce art like this? Well, you know, that we do, there is art, but the thing is that, you know, there was a system of patronage, which is gone, where you had sort of a big family would essentially pay for you and give you money to produce works of art. That was your only job. And what they have produced has lasted years, hundreds and hundreds of years. And you go, and jo paise ki baat ho rahi hai, ke we are going to spend money on a ticket to go to Rome and see those works of art. It comes later, but if for us, we always ask, when your child will say to you that I want to be a writer or an artist or whatever, you will say, Nini, first get a proper degree, then do whatever, right? Because there is a financial anxiety. And I think that's the same thing. If you are expecting that you're not going to give any financial value, not just value, ki, this is very important, lip service, but any kind of value or importance, then it can be demotivating to all but the most motivated of writers who need to produce art. It's not that they need art, they need you to consume their art, but they would die if they didn't produce their art. Yeah.
Would anyone else like to ask a question? Okay, these are the last two questions. So.
Ms. Shazaf, do you think a writer's image, the personal image, affects the reader's point of view of their work? For instance, let's talk about Colleen Hoover, right? And it's a given that she glorifies abuse in her books, and since you also said that the theme of your novel was your life, so how would you say?
So I draw from my life, but my novels are not my life, okay? So the question you're asking is that a person's image affect. So there are some writers, specifically Pakistani writers, whose work is very good and who I personally dislike intensely. I will not take names. And so every time I read them, I can only think of their voice and, you know, their clothing, and I can't, I'm put off. So the first is that don't get to know writers very well, because then, you know, you can be divorced from that fiction of her. I didn't understand your point about Colleen Hoover and the abuse.
She can't write to save her life, that woman.
Well, I haven't read her.
But she is a best-selling author.
I haven't read her.
No.
I haven't read her.
Just
yeah.
saccharine prose, awful.
But you know what? She's accessible. That's why she sells. She's accessible.
Right.
She's accessible. And I think that if writers are not accessible...
Well, so is Dolman Mall, but that doesn't mean that we have to go ahead and spend our life in it.
But abuse is something like all of us. If you look at the Me Too movement, everybody has an element of abuse, whether it's sexual, whether it's emotional. And I think this, you know, if we write about that, इसमें कोई गलत बात नहीं है. But the treatment of it, the glorification of it, of course. But I find it interesting as well that people read that, you know.
It's par for course in masculine fiction, though. There it's more than glorified. It's necessary.
I think that's another.
Where's the marammat? I had to learn to write fight scenes between young men, by the way. That's necessary.
Assalamu alaikum. My question is to you, Shazaf, that being a writer, बचपन में हम एक आर्ट की फॉर्म होती है जो कि एवेल्यूएट होती जाती है. बचपन में आप स्कैटर्ड ड्राइंग्स बनाते थे, वो एवेल्यूएट होके एक नई फॉर्म ऑफ आर्ट की सूरत ले लेती है, whether it be a poetry or whether it be something else that you want to write. However, at some point you do feel in your life that you want to go for writing a novel, and there's this other part of you saying that कि यार बस नहीं हो रहा, कैसे लिखें, कहाँ से शुरू करें, you know, there's something that's stopping you. And I guess it's totally related towards a writer's block, and I want to have your opinion on it, that what can be done.
आपको गुस्सा, एक मिनट, let him have the mic. आपको गुस्सा किस चीज़ से आता है अभी फ़िलहाल? किस चीज़ पे?
गुस्सा
Like
किस चीज़
proper
से आता है?
गुस्सा आजकल, yeah, not कि traffic वगैरह पे, but what is the conflict in your life right now? Let's
All
put
right,
you on the spot.
It's really biased because I ride a bike, right? And I ride a bike.
That
right?
is brilliant. Start from there. Start from there. What is it like to be vulnerable in the elements of the city? And don't think कि मैंने novel लिखनी है, मैंने क्या लिखना है. That is what it is, riding a bike. Because I've ridden in a public bus, and I was just remembering कि मैं जब अपने घर पे आती थी, तो I used to feel like I could let myself go, because the kind of harassment I used to face on public transport, सहम जाता था इंसान. Now, as a bike rider, you can be hit, your vulnerability. So you write about that, write about your day, के what is it like to be a bike rider. Then say, इसको मैं metaphor में कैसे change कर सकता हूँ? What is this a metaphor of? Is there a larger metaphor? The vulnerability of being one person in among large cars, among large giants. There are many metaphors. Now you've got those two things. Work with that. Eventually, as you're writing, कुछ ना कुछ तो हो जाएगा ना. Then, once you've done that, show it to someone. Not everybody. Show it to one person whom you trust, who is honest. And don't say कि नहीं वाह वाह करो. You know, where do you see? Sometimes we need someone, Miss Nadra, to see, okay, where is this going? Where does she see? I see it because I needed my friend to tell me what I was writing was a novel and not an article. You know? तो गुस्सा किस चीज़ से आ रहा है, irritate किस चीज़ से हो रहा है, वहाँ से start करो. और खुद भी you will feel calm, it's cathartic. And then what you will write, अगर कोई और पढ़ेगा, you will give the same catharsis to them. And you might not make a lot of money, but you've rendered a very valuable service to yourself and to someone else.
One last question.
Yeah, so my question is about the way communication and writing is changing its form, partly because of social media and the internet. More and more visuals and art are being intertwined with text. So I'm wondering what you see is the future of this. Will writing stay its form only of words, or do you see a new way of writing emerging with time?
I think she should, because she's doing the prose.
I think that's a tough one. I think it was the KLF, I think someone has, in this valley, has been instrumental in publishing a text that has both artwork as well as text, and in Urdu and English. So I think it's very exciting what's happening, and I think a lot of people are reading graphic novels as well. And the visual is becoming so important because of all the social media. And I think the students take to that very well. And they do say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but a picture plus text is magic. So, and a lot of people are being very creative with the visuals as well. I think it's really amazing because there's space for everything. You know, people are still writing books. They're writing, you know, so many poets and writers actually start out on Instagram with some visuals. I'm forgetting. Rupi Kaur, yes. You know, and from that, she's actually now doing performances of her poetry that were visual, right? So, I mean, and as Shazaf pointed out, I mean, I have this platform where we invite people to tell stories in person. So this is oral storytelling. And there's just so much space for various forms of communication and to bring them together. And then there's, you know, the performative arts, dance, you know, theater, and it's just very exciting, I think, a time to be creative and trying to express things.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to thank the audience present here today as well. Thank you for being a part of this session. Before we end for the day, I'd like to point out the highlights for tomorrow. We have several panel discussions and I'm just going to name them out, so we would really love to have you being a part of it. Environmental Justice for All, Balancing Population Growth and Sustainability in Pakistan. Then we have one by the Sindh Education Foundation on non-formal education in Sindh, challenges and opportunities in implementation, followed by changing cultural and economic scenario in Sindh. And the Indus Resource Center will be doing one on girls' education, status and the way forward. Our eminent speakers include Dr. Kaisar Bangali, Dr. Fahmida Hussain. We have Ahmed Chayan Sahab from Lead Engro Foundation. And we have Dr. Fateh Muhammad Mari, Vice Chancellor, Sindh Agricultural University, and many more. So we would love to have you there. And before we culminate today, I would request Madam President Shehnaz Wazir Ali Sahiba and my Dean Faculty of Social Sciences, Professor Dr. Riaz Ahmed Sheikh, to please come up on stage and give our panelists a small token of appreciation. Thank you. Can I also request my colleagues from the English program, and I think I spotted Dr. Head of Department, Dr. Najam, to be a part of this as well. My colleagues from the English program, please come up on stage. Thank you. Kaisar Sahab, Nasir Sahab, Nida, Taira. Yes, it's day one, so we're all just going to climb up on the stage. Can I please, इधर आ जाओ, पहले इधर आ जाओ, उनको उनके वो मिल जाए.
It's